everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. For those who are here in the Zoom with us or watching after on our podcast or YouTube, we are so thankful that you're here to learn with us today. Our speaker is Mark MacCarthy, and a little bit about him is that he is an adjunct faculty member in the Communication, Culture, and Technology program in the graduate school at Georgetown University, where he teaches courses in technology policy. He also teaches courses on privacy and AI ethics in the philosophy department. He's a senior fellow at the Institute for Technology, Law and Policy at Georgetown Law, and a senior policy fellow at the Center for Business and Public Policy at Georgetown's McDonough, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, School of Business. He is a senior fellow at the Future of Privacy Forum, where he works on AI and data privacy projects. Previously, he was senior vice president for public policy at the Software and Information Industry Association, where he directed initiatives and advised member companies on technology policy, privacy, AI ethics, content moderation, and competition policy in tech. He has been consultant on technology policy issues for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development for the Aspen Institute. His previous public policy experience includes senior positions with Visa Inc., the Wexler Walker Group, Capital Cities, ABC, and the Energy and Commerce Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives. He holds a PhD in philosophy from Indiana University and an MA in economics from the University of Notre Dame. So with that, welcome, Mark, and you have the floor.
Thanks, Emma, very, very much for that complete introduction, and to Isaac for issuing me this invitation to talk to you guys today. I should mention that at Brookings I do a lot of stuff on AI, and I also wrote for them a book on regulating digital industries. It came out in 2003, just about the time that people were losing interest in privacy, content moderation, and competition policy, which is what the book concerned, and beginning to focus on AI. So timing is everything. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about AI and what it is, and the title is a little bit different from, I guess, the one that went out on the flyer, but we'll cover the same ground. I've got a kind of argument to make, and I put it right up front. AI models are not like us. They lack consciousness and independent agency. So with that as the theme, let's dive in. I'm going to talk maybe 30, 45 minutes, depends on how fast I go. And then I'd love to take questions after that's over. So here's the agenda, what we're going to be doing. A little bit about what AI is, then what generative AI is, what AI can do, and then we'll go right into the kind of AI ethics and policy issues on consciousness and superintelligence. I'll say a little bit about alignment, which is a mechanism designed to address those issues, and then conclude with a way forward. Where do we go from here? So what is AI? Everybody wants to know. In many ways, it's a marketing buzzword, but there's a real meaning to it. This is the way it was defined about 10 years ago. AI is the ability of machines to function intelligently. Well, it doesn't help you very much, but intelligence refers to elements of appropriate behavior. So an artificial intelligent machine is one that behaves appropriately in its context. This is not a new thing. It began in a summer workshop at Dartmouth with John MacCarthy. No relation, he even spells his name wrong. But it was in the summer of 1956, and the conjecture in the project description was that every aspect of intelligence can be described so precisely that a machine can be made to mimic it, to simulate it. And they were pretty confident they could get it done in the summer. And it's been a long history since then. There are two basic varieties of AI that the field has divided into over the years. One is good old-fashioned AI. It's also called symbolic systems, where you take an artificial intelligence system, a software system, and you program it according to explicit rules and symbols. So you might take the rules of symbolic logic or the rules of mathematics, and then you add the subject matter of a specific field. You do physics or chemistry or biology or law or medicine, and you create a system whereby the program, not a person, but the program can act as a lawyer or engineer or a scientist or a doctor. Um, the key thing about it is that it creates a model of the universe as what it does in order to produce its result. I liken it to Greek astronomy, which had this geocentric vision of the world. The Earth is at the center, and there were concentric spheres that surrounded it. There was a physical picture of the universe at its heart. Symbolic AI has that as well. The second variety of AI is called machine learning. And there, the AI system learns from examples without explicit rules. You don't tell it what the world is like. In fact, it may not even construct a model of the world at all. You're all probably familiar with some of this when you've done those kind of statistical analyses where, for example, you would predict the price of a house from its size or from its location, or both. You'd set up a model, usually a linear equation, and then you try to estimate by taking lots and lots of cases of house prices, location, and size, maybe a couple thousand cases, and you'd say what are the exponents, what are the parameters of this mathematical model? Um, uh, Machine learning is a variety of that. Uh, it's I analogize it, however, more to Babylonian astronomy than to Greek astronomy because it doesn't really have a picture of the universe. Babylonian astronomers that they could see these little points of light and they could measure how they moved, and they kept detailed records for hundreds of years, and they found arithmetic relationships among the movements of these points of light. And using those arithmetical relationships, they could predict the seasons, they could predict when there would be an eclipse. And it was very, very useful for practical purposes, such as figuring out when to plant the crops. But they didn't have a conception of the universe at its heart. One aspect of that is that for many of these artificial intelligence systems that run on machine learning, they have no meaningful symbols whatsoever. They have lots of coefficients and numbers, but they don't have a meaning that corresponds to anything that people would understand. Another contrast, narrow versus general AI. Narrow AI is just what it sounds like. It can do one thing, right? Chess programs, self-driving cars. A chess program is not going to suddenly learn how to drive a car. More general AI systems can do more tasks, a wider range of tasks. Our ChatGPT can produce code for computer programming, or it can produce text for a poem. So it has a variety of things that it can do. Obviously, the contrast is a continuum. At the end of the continuum, you've got artificial general intelligence, where a system can mimic just about all the cognitive tasks that a person can perform. A third contrast, predictive versus generative AI. Predictive AI makes a prediction, a recommendation, or a decision. Facial recognition will tell you whether that's the same face. Credit scores will tell you whether a person deserves credit. Recidivism scores will tell you whether a person deserves parole. Spotify has a great recommendation engine that says, these are the songs you like, and they're pretty good at it. Generative AI, on the other hand, creates text or audio or visual output. You can use it, for example, to say, make me an itinerary of my trip to Sicily. or this actually happened to me. Make a song about the three friends that I'm having lunch with and make it sound like a big band sound. You can clone the voice of Jimmy Durante or Bob Dylan if you want. You can make a short movie of a woman walking down the street. All that is done through generative AI, which is different in kind from predictive AI. So that's a once over on what AI is. A little bit more on generative AI. The typical example here are large language models. They are models that start with the idea of taking words and translating them into strings of numbers. Mathematical models can't work with words, they have to work with numbers. So you go off into numerical representation of words. And the models are designed to do one thing, predict the next word in a sentence. And then a machine learning program will estimate hundreds of billions of parameters, of coefficients in a model that can make these predictions. It's trained largely on data from the internet. Two developments are really important in this area. One is a new technology called transformer technology. It's developed in 2017 by researchers at Google. But the big breakthrough was from OpenAI in November of 2022 when they released GPT 3.5. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And they launched a chatbot in November of 2022, which took the world by storm, and it had 100 million users within a couple of months. A dramatic launch of a really breakthrough AI product. Examples of large language models: OpenAI as GPT, Google as Gemini, Anthropic as Claude, Meta, Llama, Elon Musk's XAI has Grok, and a Chinese company called DeepSeek has something called V3. These models also generate images, audio, and video. DALL-E and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion generate images, for example, but you've also got voice cloning and video and music output as well. The industry loves what they call scaling laws. And that's the idea that prediction accuracy, predicting the next word in a sentence, that would improve with the amount of training data, the number of parameters, and the compute time. To give you a sense of the size of these numbers, GPT-4, it's not quite the most recent one, but almost the most recent one, consumed 2 times 10 to the 25th power arithmetic operations over the compute time that it was training its system. That was roughly 3 months of computer time. A flop is a floating point operation on a computer. It cost them $100 million. It had 1 trillion parameters. Now, think back to that model of housing prices where you're trying to predict the price based on 2 input variables. This has 1 trillion input variables. And each time someone uses it, 300 billion of those are active in each use. It was trained on maybe 13 trillion tokens. Tokens are words or parts of words. Many of the regression models that we talked about earlier, they may be trained on several thousand examples. This was trained on 13 trillion. That gives you a sense of the size. And as you go up in size, the industry has experienced over time dramatic improvement in its prediction accuracy. It's a scaling law that the industry is very fond of. After the systems are trained, then they're post-trained to perform specific tasks. And this transforms these AI models, which are just mathematical systems, into software that can provide a useful service. So you get a chatbot like ChatGPT. So how does that work? It uses the prompt as an input and then predicts the first word of the answer. And so it says Sicily. Sicily is the first word of the answer to the question of make me an itinerary to Sicily is Sicily. So then it says, okay, the input is going to be make me a trip to Sicily plus Sicily. And so then it predicts the second word, Sicily is. And then it predicts the third word, Sicily is the right? And each time it uses the prompt plus the preceding words in the answer to generate the next word in the answer. It happens so quickly, you don't realize that that's what it's doing, but that's the mechanism that's being used. And it's trained as part of this post-training to know when to stop when the answer is complete. Alignment is something that happens to these systems. These chatbots have been around for a long time, and in previous incarnations, they generated all sorts of harmful, racist, sexist, offensive output. And they were just not usable because they were just offensive tools rather than something that could be safely accommodated in business or in personal use. So this technique of reinforcement learning with human feedback was used. And in this technique, a human rater is asked, is this response better than that response? And it gives an answer, and then the language model adjusts its output accordingly. If you don't do that, terrible things happen. We probably are familiar with Grok and its recent failure of alignment when Grok praised Hitler, referred to itself as Mega Hitler, endorsed anti-Jewish conspiracies, the whole 9 yards, Holocaust denial. Let's have a second genocide. The first one was such fun. So horrible stuff. That's what goes wrong if you don't align an AI system. What can it do? It's a tool. The Maryland bishops in my neighborhood put out a note that said you can use these things to direct people toward holiness and healing and human development. So it can be a good thing. Some applications, credit scoring, recidivism scores, facial recognition, employment, every company in the country is using AI systems to screen applications and to make predictions about who's going to be a good employee. Healthcare, my wife's a doc, and she says, I'd love to have an AI system that acts as my scribe, but it's also being used in some cases for a diagnosis, especially in things like x-rays. Autonomous vehicles are an example of this. Waymo's actively providing self-driving robo-taxis in San Francisco and some other cities. Autonomous weapons are an application. They haven't been fully developed as autonomous weapons in Ukraine, but they're getting there. What can generative AI do? The new stuff? Well, it answers the questions. It can produce software code. It's been used as a sex companion. There was a wonderful story about that about a year ago. People use it for therapy. It writes reports, emails, and my students use it for writing their papers. And it's hard to tell the difference. It can summarize documents, meetings. It does translation, creative writing. You can write poems. A new thing is the industry hopes to get AI agents. These are systems that do more than just answer questions. You can say, for example, I'd like to go to Brazil and get me a plane ticket and a hotel, and I'd like to go see a nice show and a decent restaurant too. And then the next day, I'd like to have a tour of the place. Can you take care of that for me? And this piece of software will run off and do all of that without you having to do anything else. That's the hope. It acts just like a human assistant. They're not there yet, but that's one of the things that's on the planning board for the industry. Risks, hallucinations. It's not always right. In fact, it makes mistakes far too often, and it's one of the big obstacles in using this technology for consequential matters because it does make mistakes, and it's inherent in the probabilistic nature. It's predicting the next word, and so it's not aiming for accuracy. It's aiming for what is the most likely word that would come after the word that came before. And it gets to accuracy only through this intermediate stage of trying to get the most likely word. So the chances of fixing it 100% are pretty small. The hope is that you'll reduce it enough so that it doesn't matter. The mistakes are so few and so far between that they just wash out. It can be used for digital fakes. It can manipulate people. It's very, very good and persuasive. in describing situations. It can be used for cyber attacks. It can identify vulnerabilities and craft a mechanism for taking advantage of them. It can develop biochemical weapons. And because all of the input data that is part of what they are trained on, it has a tendency to reproduce the bias that already exists in those input data. Policy challenges, two ones that we won't talk about, but you may want to chat about in the conversation. Copyright. These systems are trained on copyrighted works. The people who own the copyright are by and large not compensated for that. There are a number of lawsuits where the authors, musicians, writers, and so on are saying, you owe me. You use my stuff without permission, pay me. There are also questions about content liability. In one case, one of these AI systems gave advice to a teenager to go off and kill herself, and she did. Is the company liable for that? Probably, but there's a court case that's assessing that right now. The future of work, I mean, that has very long-term philosophical implications. What if you don't have to work anymore? That would be a good thing or a bad thing. We don't know. But more immediately, and my students care a lot about this, what does it mean for entry-level jobs when people get out of school? They're already few and far between compared to 10, 15 years ago, and AI is just making it work. And we'll talk about the consciousness, superintelligence issues in a moment. Transhumanism is an issue that's worth paying attention to because it's sort of all over Silicon Valley. The tech bros love the idea of uploading their consciousness into a machine and then taking advantage of all the extra capabilities of the machine. You can think faster, you can reason more clearly, you can hear and see better than you can as a human being. And because you're embodied in silicone, all of the biological infirmities don't apply. You might be able to live forever. There are all sorts of ethical issues associated with that particular dream, but I'll leave that for a conversation later if you guys want to get into it. I want to talk about consciousness and moral status first. Consciousness. Are these things conscious? There have been enough stories and science fiction movies on this question so that it's interesting to get our thinking straight on it. There are two different schools of thought. One comes from Alan Turing, the famous computer scientist. And he developed this in the early 1950s at the high point of behaviorism in psychology. And his basic theory was, if it talks like a person, it's thinking. And he set up a test, a Turing test, in which a person would be confronted with two systems. You think of them as just two screens. And behind one screen is a person, behind the other screen is a computer, and he can ask them any question he wants. And if after a period of time of asking these questions, he can't tell the difference between the two, then you might as well say, with that kind of complex linguistic capability, it's thinking. And behind this is a sort of a philosophical idea. It's called computational functionalism, which is the idea that consciousness and thinking, they come from computations. They're just a matter of calculations. That's all they are. And these computations are independent of the hardware that's used to make the calculations. It can be a biological substrate. It can be a silicon substrate. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that it does the right computations. John Searle, a philosopher in the 1980s, so it was like 30 years later, came up with a thought experiment that challenged this idea. And his experiment was this. Imagine a person in a room, and he's got a big book with lots of rules in it. He's got a pad of paper and a pencil, and there's a slot that opens out into the external world. And through the slot are inserted pieces of paper with a whole bunch of squiggles in it. And he looks at the paper with the squiggles in it and looks up the rule book and writes down what the rule tells him to write down. on a piece of paper and then passes that piece of paper out through the slot. So that's what's going on the inside of the room. From the outside, though, it looks as though what's happening is questions are being inserted into this system in Chinese, and answers are coming back, perfectly adequate, context relevant answers are coming back from the system. And yet, one further part of the thought experiment, the person inside the room does not know Chinese. All he's doing is looking up rules in a rule book. And John Searle says, where is there anything that understands Chinese in this room? Yes, you've got linguistic competence. Chinese phrases go in, Chinese answers comes out, but it's just mimicry. And mimicry is not thinking. Sitting behind this idea of the Chinese room experiment is the idea of biological naturalism. It makes a difference what the substrate is that's doing the calculations. Brains cause minds. But because brains have certain characteristics that silicon systems don't have, they can get away with generating thought. But silicon systems can't. The best they can do is just mimic what's going on. So those are the two schools of thought on consciousness. So I'm just going to say here, and for the sake of argument, that in my view, large language models are just not conscious. They're just not. We thought, at least I did, and I think a lot of other people did, at one point thought that complex linguistic behavior indicated consciousness. It's not the only way of demonstrating that you're thinking and that you're conscious, but if you could carry on a decent conversation with someone, you had to be conscious. But I think we have evidence now from the large language models that that's not the case. They exhibit the appropriate linguistic behavior, and yet quite plainly they're incapable of having the experiences that they describe. And in my view, consciousness requires the physical capacity for sensation and perception, which these large language models simply lack. They're enclosed in language and they're trapped in language. They have no pain receptors whatsoever, for example. And so even though they can talk fluently about pain, they can talk about the kinds of pain, the intensity of pain, the duration of pain, whether it's throbbing or stabbing and so on. And they used a wide range of words to describe pain, but they clearly cannot feel it. So that persuades me that these things are not conscious. There's a related question, though, which is the question of moral persons. And to get into this, I want to talk a little bit about a thesis that was done by one of my students. This is about 10 years ago. It was at the time when people were on the internet, were involved in the use of sex robots and conversations about sex robots. So she went to the chat rooms where people were involved in these kind of conversations and listened in and participated, and the technology was so clearly underdeveloped that these things, they clearly didn't feel anything. They weren't aware of anything. They had no sensations. They had no perceptions. They had no feelings. And so the people in these chat rooms would talk happily about abusing, raping, torturing these sex robots. And when she challenged them on it, they said, well, they don't feel anything. They're not people. So she asked the question, should we nevertheless have rules that say you can't do that? And she answered yes. And the reason was that we don't want to treat sex robots poorly, because then we will treat humans poorly. I think that's right, but that's very different from treating them well because they are moral persons. The sex robots don't deserve anything, right? We treat them well because we want ourselves to behave well. But moral persons deserve fair treatment in their own right. And so the question we're asking here is whether these AI systems deserve to be treated fairly because of their own characteristics. Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, says the key here is rational agency. And he says, animals don't like that. They don't have that. They don't have the capacity for rational agency. We have to be good to animals, he says, but for our own sakes, not for theirs. The way he phrases it is, he who is cruel to animals becomes hard also in his dealings with men. Bentham, on the other hand, says, no, it's all about pleasure and pain. He's a utilitarian, so that's where he would come from. He says, the question is not can they reason or can they talk, but can they suffer? All right, so that's the idea of moral persons. It seems to me you can compose a checklist of what characteristics are required for moral status. I have a list here: general intelligence, consciousness, reasoning, self-awareness, agency, social relationships, being part of a community. But the one I focus on really is autonomy. I think moral status requires free, autonomous agency, or at least the capacity for that. And current AI systems just don't have it. They have instrumental agency. You give them some instructions, they'll do it. You give them some goals, they'll go there. They might even adopt sub goals to achieve the purposes. So, like chess programs or Go programs, they can use strategies and dream up moves that their program never would have been able to do. But it's all in service of winning the game. They can't give themselves a different goal. They're not suddenly going to be able to want to drive cars or to assess someone's credit worthiness. Now, more general purpose systems, they can shift a little bit from one task to another to achieve given goals, but the goals have to be given to them from the outside. Ask yourself, some of you have probably played with ChatGPT. You turn it on, it doesn't do anything, it just sits there, right? It acts only when you prompt it to act. It has no independent agency. It doesn't have goals. So these large language models, they're not moral persons. They're not conscious, and they aren't autonomous. But they can still cause problems. They act intelligently and they display independent instrumental agency. So they could pose risks for humanity. And this brings us to the question of superintelligence and existential risk. Let's pause on intelligence for a moment. We used to think that intelligence required consciousness, at least I did. So someone's intelligent, that means they think about something, so something's going on in their mind, right? And then they produce an answer, right? But it seems pretty clear that these large language models are acting intelligently without being conscious. They can respond to questions the way a human would. So I think we need to separate intelligence from consciousness and experience. So we'd say a system exhibits intelligence if it acts in a way that's appropriate for its context, right? Intelligence, the word, no longer describes an internal process or state of awareness. It's just a pattern of external conduct. All right. Superintelligence. What's superintelligence? The philosopher Nick Bostrom nailed the idea. It's a computer system that greatly exceeds the cognitive capacity performance of human beings in virtually all domains of interest, or as the news service Reuters put it, in every possible way, right? How would models become super intelligent? The idea is that there'll be a process of self-improvement, a recursive process of self-improvement. You get a very smart computer system, you tell it to operate on itself, and it does, and it makes a small improvement, and then the improved computer operates on itself and makes a small improvement. But computers operate so quickly that those improvements can cascade very, very, very quickly. And so a process of recursive improvement takes place. And as I.J. Good noted in 1965, you can have an intelligence explosion very, very quickly. This system could be far more capable than human beings. That's the theory. Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Meta, he thinks we're close. He says, we've begun to see glimpses of our AI systems improving themselves. Developing superintelligence, he says, is now in sight. Now, his version of superintelligence is personalist. We want to help you become the person you aspire to be. Okay, well, that may be a little blather, but he thinks we're close to developing superintelligence right now. He's not alone. Much of Silicon Valley agrees with him. So what's the problem? I mean, if an AI model, is super intelligent, it'll do stuff for us. And what's the risk here? It just, does what we tell it. What could go wrong? And the answer is you've got to be very careful what you tell these systems, even though they're not genuinely autonomous. If you specify what you want them to do the wrong way, things can go very badly. In narrow AI systems, this has been known for a very long time. There's one example from 10 years ago. It was a video game. An AI agent was tasked to play a video game to finish a boat race as quickly as possible. And the idea was that this player, artificial player, would develop complex navigation strategies that would allow it to zip through to the end and beat all possible opponents. Instead, it discovered that it could go in circles, right? And accumulate the reward points and never have to win the race at all. So it was bad system design. It did something unexpected. It didn't do what you wanted it to do. So there are lots of examples where a poorly designed reward system can produce unintended results. This could be catastrophic if done by a super intelligent system. There's one study that was done very recently by the AI company Anthropic. They asked an AI model to pretend it was part of a company, and its job was to review emails and send emails in response as appropriate. And one of the emails came from the CEO, and it said, "This system," they called it Alex, "we're gonna have to shut it down. It's not doing its job, and so we have to shut it down." And other emails said that the CEO was having an affair, and if it came out, that would be the end of his career and his marriage. So we don't want it to come out. What happened? In all the tests, the AI model basically blackmailed the CEO to prevent itself from being shut down. So self-preservation is something that could take place in these systems. And there's a famous problem, the paperclip problem that Nick Bostrom developed in 2014. Suppose you devise a generally intelligent system and make it super intelligent, so it's better than we are at all possible tasks. And you say, I'm going to control it by simply having it produce paper clips, nothing else. That's all it does. So what could go wrong? Well, the AI is single-minded. It's generally intelligent. Indeed, it's super intelligent. So it's going to begin to appropriate resources from all over the place to do its job, which is the single job of producing paper clips. We realize, uh-oh, that's a problem. We better shut this system down. When it sees that we're about to shut it down, it says, no, my job is to produce paper clips. So it resists us. We fight it. It fights us back. It defeats us. It's the end of humanity. Now you read that kind of example and you think, okay, that's easy to fix. I'll think for a few minutes and I'll fix it. The field has been trying for 10 years to find a general way of solving this kind of control problem, and it hasn't succeeded yet. It's the alignment problem. Can we design a super intelligent system that we can control and ensure that it doesn't harm us? There are really two problems here. One is technical alignment. How do we ensure that systems do what we want? And the other is normative. What do we want them to do? What values, goals, and purposes? What ethical systems do we instill in AI systems? But the general idea is clear. Give machines ethics and it'll be safe. Solve the control problem the same way we solve the control problem from people. I mean, people are capable of doing all sorts of horrible things. They can take a gun and shoot people, right? But as part of the socialization process, we give them internal constraints. And those constraints prevent them from doing things that they're eminently capable of doing, but which we don't want them to do. Give them a system of ethics, and we'll be safe. So there's an objection. Well, you give a system of ethics, and it says, I don't like those ethics. I'm going to change it. But it turns out that if, that's not how ethics works. Think about humans. Gandhi is a pacifist. And suppose you say to Gandhi, here, take this pill and you'll want to be a killer. You say, I'm not going to take that pill. I mean, yeah, I know if I take it, I'll be happy to be a killer, but I don't want to be a killer. So your moral code tends to be pretty stable. And that suggests that if you give a computer system an initial moral code, it will stick with that moral code. So, examples. Um, you could make the moral machine a utilitarian machine. It could say, I'm going to adopt courses of action that maximize happiness. You could make it a deontological system. You set up a system of duties the way Kant wants you to, or the way W.D. Ross, David Ross would like. If there are conflicts, some sort of moral intuition can resolve that. Or you can go the direction of virtue ethics. What would Jesus or the Buddha or Socrates do? What would a virtuous person do in this circumstance? Those are the three different ways you could go about doing it. And Isaac Asimov, the famous science fiction writer, went in this direction with his three laws of robotics. A robot can't injure a human being, he has to obey orders, and it must protect its own existence, consistent with the first two rules. And he spent a large part of his career writing stories that show why those rules don't work in particular circumstances. Run Around is a perfectly good one. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's great fun. But this whole idea of moral rules as a way to get at machine ethics, I think is a mistake. I mean, people do become moral through learning moral rules, but they're only rules of thumb. They're not hard and fast. There are exceptions in particular cases. Do I tell the truth? If I tell the truth to a murderer, he'll find somebody and kill him. So you can lie. There are conflicts of rules. They can't be resolved through explicit hierarchies. You need judgment and intuition in particular cases. That's why we go to wise people and say, what should I do? People have that kind of capacity, that kind of practical wisdom that you go to for advice. And where does this judgment come from? It doesn't come from simply following rules. So rules are not the answer. So why not turn to this machine learning trick, the one that we talked about earlier? Expose AI systems to lots of examples of moral decisions. It'll learn to match the decisions in its data set, and that way it can come to mimic human ethical judgment. Problem, I mean, it's a technical problem. What about cases far outside its training data? That's always been the machine learning Achilles heel. More interestingly, whose moral decisions will we use to train our AI systems? Everybody's decisions, most people's decisions. Is this majority rule? Maybe we should go to the moral experts. Who are they? Maybe Buddhists, vegans, what? And we've all seen in the last month or so political opposition mounting to woke AI. We're back to the culture wars that raged in social media. So where do we go from here? I'm going to wrap up. So if you've got questions, I see that some are coming into the chat. Now's the time to begin to formulate them. Status quo, current systems, they exhibit intelligence, not conscious, no independent agency. They're more capable than humans at some cognitive tasks, less capable at others. They're more general than older AI systems, but they're not generally intelligent. They're not super intelligent. Can we make machines like us? In principle, human beings are physical systems, and somehow these physical systems have intelligence, consciousness, and independent agency. So in principle, we should be able to build artificial machines like us. But, and this is something to take seriously, it might just be beyond our engineering capacity. There are lots of things that are physical, but we can't reproduce them. I mean, we can't make stars or planets or living things. We can't even predict the weather, much less control it. And yet these are all physical systems. We might be closer today than the ancient Egyptians, but the distance seems pretty enormous to me to make systems, machines that are like us. Is it coming soon? The industry thinks so. My view, scaling has hit a wall. It used to be over the last 10 years, the increase in capacity was exponential, but it's hit a wall. If you increase data parameters and compute time, you get better results, but they're so tiny. It's not really generating the kind of vast increases in capacity that the previous systems did. The industry thinks that you can get around that because if you ask one of these systems a question and it thinks for a very long time using what they call chain of thought reasoning, it can do better. So they think maybe just inference time compute will give you what you need. But so far, those results have been good, but they've been smaller than earlier results, and they are confined to very limited areas, science, math, logic, and coding, not more general areas. And this idea of recursive self-improvement, let the AIs work on itself, there's no indication that the AI systems are able to improve themselves. They're pretty clunky, the AI agents that we have right now, and there's no indication that they can conduct AI research on their own. So my sense, we have to go beyond machine learning. Some combination of the symbolic systems and machine learning. At some point, we've got to give AI systems a model of the physical and social world. We need some Greek astronomy, not just Babylonian astronomy. And moreover, these AI systems need to learn not from language, but through direct interaction with the physical world. That seems to me to be the way forward. It's actually good news that we're pretty far away from this because we need the time to figure out how to solve the alignment problem. There's still plenty of time for us to do it, but we probably need to spend some time on figuring out how to control these systems before we build them. A summary, AI is just math, but these models are going to be very, very useful tools. We're still at the beginning of learning how to use them. Electricity, it took 20 to 40 years to learn how to get that new innovation into productive use in the nation's factories. Current systems, they're not conscious, they're not autonomous, they don't have moral status. They behave intelligently, but they're not likely to become super intelligent soon. They can spin out of control if we don't align them properly. No one has a good technical way of doing that yet, and we disagree about how we would want to align them if we knew how to do it. And to repeat, the good news is that we have lots of time to figure all this out. So let me stop there. Be delighted to take any of your questions. I think someone's going to act as a moderator to provide those questions. So let me stop there and be delighted to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. We talked about so much, and I still feel like we just scraped the surface of all there is to say, but you personally eased some of my, at least like current concerns. So I hope other people feel the same way. But yeah, we do have some questions and people are still welcome to add some more. This first one is from Debbie who says, thank you for this. So much to unpack. How should schools and universities prepare students for an AI integrated world?
That's a good one. Number one is they should not run away screaming from the technology. That's probably the first reaction of educators. They are going to be used in business and in other institutions where people will need to be employed. And so they have to learn how to use them as part of their college education, high school education as well, I think is they need to be taught how to use them, just like they have to learn all sorts of other digital tools. My own sense is that they have to understand the limitations, and the most serious limitation is that if you just ask one of these systems a question and get an answer, you have to know what the answer is before you send that AI generated answer out to the rest of the world. They make so many mistakes right now that you simply cannot trust them to be reliable reporters of what they're being asked to do or talk about. You just can't. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is if you do want to use them and you're able to review them in that way and check what they put out there, they are enormously valuable tools, and you've got to learn how to make use of them. So schools have to not run away from them. They have to teach them, students, how to use them. In my own class, I say, I don't want you to just write the paper using AI. I mean, I still have them writing papers. some people have said that's a mistake, that you should just stop that as an assessment methodology. But I still want them to learn how to write papers. But if they want to use ChatGPT to summarize a little idea that they know, but they just don't want to write it, that's okay. I mean, you could do the same thing by looking up in Wikipedia. So, give me an analysis of Descartes' cogito ergo sum, is one possibility. If they want to go to ChatGPT and say, give me an analysis of uh, Descartes' cogito ergo sum, and then take the paragraph that results and put it in their paper, that's fine. They just have to say they got it from ChatGPT, right? And they better check to make sure this it's a correct summary. I mean, ChatGPT might have gotten it wrong. So I do think they need to learn how to use it. Um, and I don't think it's enough to just learn that they can turn in papers that are written in toto by AI, because they may think, well, when I get into the real workplace, all they want me to do is write a report. I'll write the report. I don't have to know what's in it. It says, no, if you write a report, you're going to have to talk to your colleagues or to your clients. You have to know the material in the report. And if you just had AI do it for you, you won't know it. And so when your colleagues and your clients ask you questions and you don't know the answers, they will say, this guy's a fake. This guy's a fake. So I do think you have to teach them that they have to master the material and then just use these things as tools rather than a replacement for actually understanding subject matter.
Okay, thank you. Um, our other question is from Judy, and she says, if the computer system has a good moral code initially, but that code conflicts with its task, as in Alex or the paperclip experiment, could it not override, reasoning its task takes precedent?
Yeah, I think that's possible. But think about how moral codes work for people. Um, you say here's your moral compass, and over a period of time, you absorb all sorts of moral codes and instincts and so on. And now you're given a job, right? And the job conflicts with your moral code. Well, in for human beings, you sort of make a judgment, right? You sort of say, do I follow the moral code, or do I, in this case, do what's wrong because it's to my interest or my advantage in this particular job situation? Um, the AI systems don't have that kind of uh, independence, right? So the moral constraints are binding. They're absolutely binding, right? They're not the kind of thing that you can override in context. Um, the problem, and you point to a real problem, is that we don't yet know how to program in those binding rules in a way that will allow them to act flexibly in the real world, right? We know that they can't just change things because they want to. They're not independent like that. They'll do what they're told to do. But the question is, we haven't given them enough information, enough sense of a moral code so that they can do what we want them to do. But we can't pretend that they have enough independence and flexibility so that they'll just decide what to do on their own. So that's my quick answer. And that's, Judy, you point to one reason why this problem has not been solved as a technical matter, right? Regardless of what the moral code is, we still don't have a way to say to a system, here's what we want you to do in this circumstance, because just programming rules into it, like the Asimov stuff, doesn't seem to be an answer. And the machine learning stuff creates a different set of problems. Whose whose material are you going to be using? Whose decisions are you going to be using as the training data?
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think we are going to wrap up. I wanted to thank you, Mark, again for teaching us. So interesting. This recording will be available on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. I know there were a lot of folks who wanted to come but couldn't make it. And thank you all for being here, and have a great rest of your day.